I moved into the rental on Row in late March, a few weeks after I turned 27. I remember the timing mostly because my birthday that year was quiet in a way I hadn't expected. No party, no big dinner, just a couple of phone calls and a cake I bought for myself on the way home from work. It was the first year I'd lived entirely on my own. No roommates, no partner, no shared lease. That was intentional. I'd grown up in the same county about 40 minutes south, in a town that revolved around a paper mill and a high school football team that people took far too seriously. Most people I knew stayed close to home, married early, or moved in predictable circles. I didn't hate it there, but by my mid-20s, I felt like I'd been circling the same block for too long. When my job transferred me north to a smaller satellite office, I took it without much hesitation. Row was a short, narrow street just off a larger road that connected three neighboring towns. It wasn't scenic, but it was cool. The houses were modest, mostly single-story places, and driveways and small fenced yards. The rental I chose sat near the end of the row. No porch, just a concrete step and a cheap metal railing that wobbled if you leaned on it. What sold me was the simplicity. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a small kitchen, and a living room with a wide front window that let in good light during the afternoon. No shared walls, no upstairs neighbors. After years of hearing other people's TVs and arguments through thin drywall, the silence felt like a luxury. The landlord's name was Mickey. He was in his late 50s, hard to tell exactly, with thinning gray hair and a permanent stoop in his shoulders that made him look smaller than he probably was. When we met to sign the lease, he spoke slowly and deliberately, like he wanted to be careful not to miss anything important. He explained the rules, pointed out where the water shutoff was, told me garbage pickup was Tuesday mornings, all standard things. Toward the end, as he handed me the keys, he added something that I didn't think much about at the time. "I keep a spare," he said, tapping the key ring lightly against the table. "Just for emergencies. Burst pipe, fire alarm, that kind of thing." I nodded. That wasn't unusual. Every landlord I'd ever had said something similar. "Of course," I said. "That makes sense." He smiled, but it was a strange smile, tight around the mouth, like he was relieved I hadn't questioned it. At the time, I took it as a man who'd probably dealt with difficult tenants before and didn't want to argue about access rights. The first few weeks, I was still settling into my new job, learning people's names, figuring out which grocery store was worth the extra drive. My evenings were fine. I'd cook simple meals, watch whatever was on, and go to bed early. It felt stable in a way my life hadn't in a while. I noticed small things about the house that marked it as older. The bathroom fan rattled when it ran too long. One of the kitchen drawers stuck unless you lifted it slightly as you pulled. The hallway light switch needed to be flipped just right or it wouldn't turn on. None of that bothered me. I liked learning the quirks of a place. Mickey stopped by once during that first month to replace a broken smoke detector in the hallway. He called ahead and asked if it was a good time. When he arrived, he took his shoes off without being asked and worked quietly, barely speaking. I stood in the kitchen and made small talk, mostly out of politeness. He answered politely but briefly, like conversation was something he endured rather than enjoyed. When he left, he stood on the step for a moment, looking back at the house. "Everything okay so far?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's been good." He nodded, satisfied, and walked back to his truck. Looking back, that was the last moment when everything felt completely normal. In mid-April, I came home later than usual because I'd stayed after work to help a coworker finish a report. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a truck parked on the street a few houses down. It was an older car with a ladder rack on top. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people on the row had work trucks. Inside, the house felt the same as always. Quiet, still. I went through my routine, set my bag down, changed clothes, started dinner. At some point, I glanced out the front window and noticed the truck was still there. Again, not alarming. Someone visiting a neighbor. It wasn't until later, when I was washing dishes, that I realized something felt off. The front light was on. I hadn't turned it on. I was careful about that kind of thing. Electricity wasn't included in the rent, and I'd gotten into the habit of turning lights off when I left. I stood at the sink for a few seconds, staring at the glow on the front lawn. Then I walked to the door and flipped the switch. The light went off immediately. I told myself I must have turned it on without thinking. That happens. People do things on autopilot all the time. I went to bed without giving it much more thought. Over the next couple of weeks, similar things happened. A window I was sure I'd locked was unlocked when I checked it later. Each time I explained it away. I was adjusting to a new routine. I was tired. I was distracted. None of it was dramatic enough to justify panic. The first time I felt genuinely uneasy was the afternoon I ran into Mickey unexpectedly. I'd taken the day off to handle some errands and was pulling into the driveway just after noon when I saw his truck parked at the curb in front of my house. He was standing on the sidewalk, looking toward the front window. He turned when he heard my car. "Oh," he said. "Didn't realize you were home today." "What's up?" I asked. He gestured vaguely toward the house. "Just doing a quick check on the property. Make sure everything's holding up." I looked at the house, then back at him. "Did something happen?" No, he said quickly. "Just routine." I didn't like the word routine in that context, but I didn't know how to challenge it without sounding accusatory. "I usually call first," he added. "Didn't want to disturb you." "You didn't," I said. "I just got here." He nodded again, relief crossing his face in a way that made my stomach tighten. He left a moment later, waving as he climbed into his truck. A few days later, I noticed Mickey's truck parked on the street again when I got home. It was closer, just across from my driveway. I watched from inside as he sat in the cab for a long time without getting out. Eventually, he drove away. I told a coworker about it the next day, framing it as an awkward landlord situation, rather than anything threatening. "He probably just worries about his property," she said. "Some people are like that." That explanation made sense. I clung to it because the alternative, that something was wrong, felt like an overreaction. Things escalated slowly, almost imperceptibly. I'd catch a glimpse of someone near the edge of my yard when I looked up from the sink, only to see nothing when I focused. Once, I heard the sound of the front door handle turning while I was in the bedroom. When I opened the door, no one was there. I started locking the bedroom door at night. I didn't tell anyone about that. It felt embarrassing, like admitting fear without enough evidence to justify it. It was May. I slept with the windows cracked open. I'd gone to bed around 11 after a long day and fell asleep quickly. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. The room felt different, the air heavier. I lay still, listening. Then I heard breathing. It wasn't coming from me. I opened my eyes. Mickey was standing at the foot of my bed. He wasn't speaking. His arms hung stiffly at his sides, his hands clenched so tightly I could see the tendons in his wrists. His face looked wrong, like his features weren't arranged correctly anymore. His jaw was slack, his eyes wide and unfocused, darting slightly as if he wasn't fully aware of where he was. He was shaking. I could see it in his shoulders, in the slight tremor of his hands. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he took a step forward. I rolled out of bed and ran. I stopped at a neighbor's house a few doors down and pounded on the door until someone answered. When the officers arrived, they found Mickey inside my house. He didn't explain himself. He looked confused, almost childlike, as they let him out. They told me he'd used his spare key. The official charge was breaking and entering. I never went back to Row. I stayed with a friend until I found another place, this time an apartment with secure entry and a management company instead of a private landlord. I broke the lease without penalty. Mickey didn't contest it. I heard later that he claimed he thought the house was empty, that he'd been checking on things, that he didn't remember going into my bedroom. I was 24, living on my own for the first time in a small rental house in the Midwest. I'd moved there for work after finishing a technical program, and at the time, it felt like a step forward. Nothing exciting, but stable. I worked nights at a 24-hour gas station off a state highway. It wasn't directly on the interstate, but close enough that we got a steady mix of locals, truck drivers, and people passing through. The shift was quiet most nights. From 10 at night until 6 in the morning, things slowed down to a predictable rhythm. A few regulars getting cigarettes or coffee, truckers stopping to use the bathroom. I didn't mind the work. Night suited me. The manager liked me because I showed up on time and didn't cause problems. I liked that I didn't have to deal with crowds or supervisors hovering over me. Most of the time, it was just me in the building and the traffic outside thinning out after midnight. The station itself was old but clean. You could see everything from behind the counter, which gave me a sense of control. Even when things felt off, at least nothing was hidden. My routine was consistent. I'd clock in, brew fresh coffee, wipe down the counters, restock whatever was low, and settle in. Around midnight, the same handful of people would cycle through. By 2 or 3 in the morning, there were long stretches where nobody came in at all. That was when he started coming around. The first time, I didn't notice anything unusual. He came in around 1 in the morning, paid for gas inside, and bought a pack of cigarettes. Mid-40s. Average height, average build. He didn't smell like alcohol, didn't slur his words, didn't act aggressive. If anything, he was quiet to the point of being forgettable. He paid in cash, didn't make eye contact, left without saying much. I watched him walk back to his car because that's just what you do on night shift. He pulled out and drove toward town. The next night, he came back. Same time. This time he bought coffee too. Still paid in cash, still quiet. I was thinking it was a little odd, but not concerning. Plenty of people had routines, especially night people. By the third night, I recognized him immediately when he walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just stood at the counter until I finished ringing him up. Cigarettes again, gas again. He lingered a second longer than before, like he was about to say something, then changed his mind and left. I told myself I was reading into it. By the fourth night, it started to register. He came in later than usual, closer to 3 in the morning. The store had been empty for almost an hour. When I saw his car pull up, I felt a small, involuntary tightening in my chest. He came inside, walked slower this time, and instead of coming straight to the counter, he wandered down one of the aisles. Pretended to look at snacks. Picked something up, put it back. Eventually, he came to the counter and bought the same things as always. When I handed him his receipt, he finally looked at me, not in a threatening way, just steady, like he was studying my face longer than necessary. "Long night?" he asked. I said, "Yeah, it usually was." He nodded, took his bag, and left. After that, I watched him through the window instead of looking back down at the register. Instead of getting into his car right away, he stood next to it, walked around the front, around the back, checked his trunk, opened one of the rear doors, and closed it again. Eventually, he got in and drove off. The next morning, when my relief came in, I mentioned it. Said there was a guy who'd been coming in every night, hanging around his car a bit. She said people were weird at night. I let it go. Over the next week, he came in almost every shift I worked, sometimes once, sometimes twice, always late, always alone, always the same purchases. He started making small comments, asking how long I'd worked there, saying the night shift must get lonely. I answered politely but vaguely. I didn't volunteer information. I didn't tell him where I lived, what I did outside of work, or anything personal. I didn't think I was in danger, but I'd worked enough customer-facing jobs to know better than to overshare. One night, I noticed him outside again, but this time he wasn't near his car. He was walking between the pumps, slowly. The station lights cast long shadows, and he moved in and out of them, hands in his jacket pockets. He circled the building once, stopping near the side wall where the dumpsters were. He stayed there for a minute, then came inside. He didn't buy anything. He stood at the counter and asked what time my shift ended. That was when I felt something shift. I didn't answer directly. I said the schedule changed week to week. He nodded like that was reasonable, smiled faintly. Then he left. I locked the door behind him for a few minutes, which technically wasn't allowed, but management also told us to use our judgment at night. I waited until another car pulled in before unlocking it again. Nothing else happened that shift. I wish I could say I reported it right then, or asked for a schedule change, or trusted my instincts more aggressively. But nothing he'd done crossed a clear line. And night work trains you to normalize things that feel off. A few nights later, I didn't see him at all. That should have been a relief. Instead, it unsettled me. Around 4 in the morning, I stepped outside to empty a trash can near the pumps. That's when I saw his car parked across the street, hidden behind a closed auto parts store. The The lights were off, the engine wasn't running, I couldn't see anyone inside. Eventually, I went back in and locked the door until sunrise. He never came inside that night. 2 days later was my day off. I slept late, ran errands, and spent the evening at home. My house was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, narrow hallway, front door that opened directly into the living room. It wasn't in a neighborhood exactly. It's like a cluster of rentals along a side road. Around 11, I was sitting on the couch watching something I wasn't really paying attention to when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up and walked to the door, looking through the peephole out of habit more than fear. It was him. Same jacket, same hat, standing close enough that his face filled the view. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. I remember thinking there had to be a mistake, that maybe I was tired, that it was someone who just looked like him. Then he raised his hand and knocked again. I didn't open the door. I asked what he wanted. He said my name, like it was normal. That was when I stepped back from the door. I asked how he knew where I lived. He didn't answer right away. He said he just wanted to talk. Said he'd seen me working nights and figured I might be lonely too. I told him to leave. His tone changed immediately. The calm dropped out of his voice. He said I was being rude. Said he'd come all this way and I wouldn't even open the door. Said he just wanted a conversation. I told him again to leave, and this time I said I was calling the police. That's when he started yelling. I heard movement on the other side of the door, and I heard metal scraping. I didn't look through the peephole again. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and locked myself in the bathroom, which was the only room with a solid interior door. I called 911 and told them there was a man trying to break into my house. I pictured the door giving way, even though I didn't know if that was actually happening. The dispatcher stayed calm, asked for my address, told me officers were on the way. I stayed on the floor with my back against the tub, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the sounds from the front of the house. His voice came through the door again, muffled, angry, accusing me of wasting his time. The police arrived. I didn't come out until they knocked and identified themselves. When I opened the door, I saw deep gouges in the wood near the handle. The frame was cracked, damaged enough that it was obvious what he'd been doing. They caught him a few blocks away. He still had the knife on him. They told me he'd been arrested before, multiple times. Stalking charges, trespassing, an attempted kidnapping case that hadn't stuck due to lack of cooperation from the victim. I wasn't the first person he'd followed from work. I'm Clara, was 32 at the time, living alone in a town in the Pacific Northwest. The house was nothing special, but it sat close to the edge of a national forest, which was part of why I liked it. I worked remotely as a technical writer for a medical equipment company. Long hours at a desk and very little reason to leave the house unless I made myself. Hiking was how I did that. It wasn't a passion in the dramatic sense. I didn't chase summits or document anything online. I just liked being outside, walking for a few hours, letting my head settle. I grew up in Oregon, in a family where being outdoors was normal but not romanticized. My parents weren't survivalists or thrill seekers. We camped, we hiked, we followed the rules. Stay on the trail, tell someone where you're going, carry water, that kind of thing. When I moved back to the area after a few years out of state, I fell back into those habits without much thought. On weekends, especially Sundays, I drive out to one of the nearby trail systems and walk for half a day. The trail I'm talking about wasn't remote in the way people imagine when they think of wilderness. It was maintained, marked, and popular enough to have a parking lot, a posted map, and a trailhead logbook mounted inside a wooden box. It looped through mixed forest, fir, cedar, some open meadow, and followed a low ridge for a few miles before dropping back down toward the river. On a busy day, you might see families, retirees with trekking poles, maybe a trail runner or two. On quieter days, you could go an hour without seeing anyone. That day, it was my birthday week, and I'd taken the afternoon off. The weather had finally cooled, the kind of cool that makes you feel awake instead of chilled. I parked at the trailhead a little after noon. There were only 2 other cars there, both dusty, both with out-of-state plates. That didn't strike me as unusual. The trail was near a highway. I filled out the logbook like I always did. Name, date, intended route. It wasn't required, but it was encouraged, and I'd been raised to treat those suggestions seriously. The box was old, the hinge squeaking when I opened it. I remember seeing how many entries were half filled, people scribbling first names or nicknames, not bothering with times. I wrote clearly, even added my return estimate. It felt like a small, responsible ritual. The first part of the hike was easy and familiar. The trail climbed gently, the ground covered in needles that muted sound. I passed the first mile marker and stopped to adjust my pack. I wasn't carrying much. Water, a granola bar, a light jacket, my phone. I didn't have pepper spray or anything like that. I'd never felt the need. I'd done this trail ton of times. For the first hour or so, nothing stood out. I saw a couple coming down the trail. We exchanged polite hellos. I heard birds moving through the trees. My mind wandered the way it usually did. Work things. A conversation I'd had with my sister the night before. What I might cook for dinner. It was somewhere past the halfway point of the loop that I noticed the man. I didn't hear him approach. I just became aware of someone ahead of me where the trail narrowed between two stands of trees. I assumed he'd been stopped to check a map or tie a boot. That happens. As I got closer, I saw that he was standing just off the trail, not blocking it, but close enough that I had to slow down and decide how to pass. He was facing away from me when I first saw him, maybe a little shorter than me. He wore dark pants and a gray jacket. His hair was dark and thinning at the crown. There was nothing immediately alarming about his appearance. What made me uneasy was the way he turned when he noticed me. He didn't step aside or give the casual nod people usually do. He turned fully and looked at me, then looked past me, down the trail behind me, and then back at me again. It wasn't a long look, but it was deliberate, like he was checking something. I slowed to a stop a few feet away and said hello, the way you do when you're not sure what else to say. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I know that's a phrase people overuse, but in this case it fits. His mouth moved, his eyes didn't change. "Nice day," he said. "It is," I replied. I was already shifting my weight, angling my body so I could step around him and keep moving. He asked me if I was hiking the whole loop. The question itself wasn't strange. People talk on trails, but his tone was flat, and he didn't move to make space. I answered vaguely, said I was just out for a walk. "I'm heading back that way," he said, gesturing in the same direction I was going. "Mind if I walk with you?" The request landed heavier than it should have. It wasn't friendly. It felt transactional, like he'd decided something and was asking out of habit rather than interest. I told him no. I said I preferred to walk alone. I didn't apologize for it, but I didn't make a scene either. I stepped to the side and started past him. For a moment, I thought that would be it. People get offended, people move on. But as I passed, I felt him step in behind me, close enough that I could hear his breathing. He said something then, asked if I was sure, said it was safer with company, but I didn't turn around. I picked up my pace, not running, just walking faster. The trail curved ahead, dipping slightly. I was thinking that I should turn back toward the trailhead, that there was no reason to continue the loop if I felt uneasy. I told myself that I was overreacting, but I turned around anyway. It seemed like a reasonable decision. I slowed, then stopped, and turned to go back the way I'd come. He was closer than I expected, close enough that when I turned, we were almost face to face. I startled, took a step back, and said, more sharply than before, that I was going back and I didn't want company. He didn't respond. He looked past me again, down the trail toward the parking lot. Then he nodded, like he was agreeing with something I hadn't said. I started walking, this time deliberately, keeping my shoulders straight, my head forward. I could hear him behind me again. I was about 30 seconds from the bend where the trail opened up a little when something caught my ankle and yanked. It wasn't a sharp pain, just a sudden, forceful pull that took my foot out from under me. I fell forward, catching myself with my hands, my knee hitting the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of me. I didn't understand what had happened. I thought I'd tripped on a root. Then I felt the pressure around my lower leg. There was a wire cord looped around my ankle, thin, metallic, tight. It wasn't cutting into my skin, but it was firm enough that when I tried to pull my leg back, it held. I twisted, scrambling to get upright, and saw that the other end of the wire was in his hands. He hadn't jumped on me or shouted. He hadn't said anything at all. He was leaning back, bracing himself, using his weight to keep me from standing. I yelled then. I kicked with my free leg, aiming blindly. I managed to get my knee under me and pushed up, grabbing at the wire with my hands. It bit into my palms, sharp enough to hurt. I didn't think about that. I just pulled. He stumbled forward when I did, losing whatever leverage he had. I rolled sideways, tugging my leg free. The wire slipped, loosening enough that I could get my foot out. I didn't stop to see if it was fully off. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The trail wasn't flat there. It rose unevenly, and I stumbled more than once, catching myself on trees, on brush. I expected to feel him grab me again, expected to hear him gaining ground. I did hear him behind me, but he wasn't running the way I was. His footsteps were uneven, slower. There was a dragging sound at first, then nothing. When I finally risked a glance over my shoulder, he was standing still on the trail, bent slightly forward, hands on his knees, watching me go. I kept running, and reached the trailhead. It felt both endless and over in seconds. I didn't see him come out of the woods. I drove straight home. I don't remember the drive itself, just arriving, locking the door behind me, and standing in my kitchen with my pack still on my back. My hands were scraped and red, my knee was swelling. I sat down on the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. After a while, I called the police. I told them what had happened as clearly as I could. Where I was, what the man looked like, what he'd done. They asked me if I was injured. I said no, not seriously. They asked if he'd said anything else. I said no. They came to my house to take a statement, didn't find anyone matching my description. They found the wire, though. It was still there, looped around a small sapling just off the trail. They collected it as evidence.